The ocean's abyss, a domain of stunning splendor and eerie enigma. For ages, it has birthed tales of enormous monsters and ghostly horrors. Welcome to our realm, our narratives, where today we plunge into the spine-chilling stories of gigantic sea beasts. From the devastating Kraken to the spectral sirens, brace yourself to unveil the reality behind the legends. Are you prepared to probe the depths? Let's dive in. Kraken, sovereign of the deep. Now, let us transport our thoughts to a time when the earth was vast, the seas mostly unmapped, and the boundary between folklore and fact was as fleeting and fluid as sea mist. Imagine, if you will, the relentless stretch of the North Atlantic, a zone of endless dusk during the long winters, where ice floes clash with the sound of splintering bones, and the wind wails like a specter through the rigging of any ship daring or reckless enough to sail there. Aboard such a vessel, let's name her the Polar Dawn, a robust cog crafted from sturdy Norwegian timber, our tale finds its anchor. Her captain, a man called Eric Flamebeard, so named for the vibrant cascade of his striking facial hair, which flowed down his chest like a frost-covered cascade, was a sailor of considerable fame. He had braved tempests
until
that
it was
would
a
drive
small
lesser
hill upon
men
the
to their
surface of
knees,
the ocean.
charted courses
And then
by
from its
stars
peak,
few could identify,
something began to
and his
emerge.
laughter was as
At
robust
first it
as
looked
the
like a
mead he
series of
relished.
jagged, dark rocks,
His crew, a
glistening
diverse
wetly in the
band of
dim
rugged
light.
Norsemen,
Perhaps the
Swedes,
treacherous
and
tips
the
of a hidden
occasional
reef.
bold Dane,
But no
trusted
reef
him
moved with such
completely,
purpose.
for he had
No
always
reef
guided
pulsed
them
with such
back,
an
their
undeniable,
holds brimming with fish
terrifying
or pelts,
semblance of
their
life.
purses clinking
These
with
were not
coin.
rocks.
On this
Slowly,
voyage, they
agonizingly,
were far from the
truth
familiar
began to
shelter
dawn
of the
upon the
fjords,
horrified crew of the
venturing
Northern
into
Star.
waters
The
seldom
rocks
marked
were the
on charts,
barnacle-encrusted,
seeking fresh fishing
seaweed-draped
grounds, as the
protuberances
old
of a
ones
living
had
creature.
grown sparse.
A creature of such impossible
Days
scale
merged
that their
into
minds
weeks,
struggled
the
to
vista
comprehend
an
it.
unchanging sweep
The sea
of gray
around this
waves
emerging
under an
Leviathan
even
began
grayer
to
sky.
boil and churn,
The
not
sun,
with heat,
when it
but
bothered
with
to
the sheer
appear, was a
displacement of its
faint,
colossal
aloof orb.
bulk.
A
And then,
quiet fatigue
the arms.
began to settle
Oh
over
gods,
the crew,
the
a
arms,
subtle longing
like the
for
writhing
home
branches
and
of some nightmare
It
forest.
started quietly,
They unfurled
as
from the
such
roiling
things
water.
often do,
Each
with
one
an
was thicker than
unnatural
the Northern
calm.
Star's mainmast,
The wind,
a pillar
their
of slick,
ever-present, lively
dark
companion,
muscle,
driving
tapering
them
to a
forward
questing,
or teasing their
intelligent
sails,
tip.
seemed
They rose
to
higher
exhale
and
one
higher,
final,
a dozen or more,
sorrowful sigh
reaching
before
towards the
fading.
sky like supplicants
The
to
Polar
some
Dawn
dark,
languished
forgotten
in the
god,
sudden, heavy
before beginning
stillness,
to arch
her
and
sails
curve,
drooping
their undersides
lifelessly like the
revealing
wings
rows
of a
upon
fading
rows of
bird.
suckers, each
The
the size of a
familiar creak
warrior's
and moan
shield,
of her timbers,
each capable of
typically
gripping
a
with a
soothing
force that
lullaby
could
for the
pulverize
sailors,
stone.
now echoed
The air
louder,
was now
almost
thick with that
reproachful,
strange
in the deep silence. Eric Flamebeard stood on his quarterdeck, his sharp blue eyes, the hue of polar ice, scanning the horizon. He inhaled deeply, a habit honed by years at sea. The air was cold, yes, but there was something more, a faint, almost undetectable scent, like ancient, stirred soil, mingled with something metallic, like aged blood, yet distinct,
rank
more
odor,
primal.
a stench of the
He
deepest,
scowled, his
darkest
fiery brows
ocean
knitting
trenches,
together.
a smell of ancient
Strange,
decay
he murmured
and raw,
to his first
primal
mate,
power.
a towering
The
figure
humming
named
vibration
Bjorn.
intensified,
sea
shaking the
holds
very
its breath,
teeth in their
Bjorn.
heads. The
I
Northern
don't like
Star, caught in the unnatural
Bjorn, a
currents
man of
generated
few
by the
words but
rising
immense
behemoth,
might,
began
merely
to drift,
grunted, his
slowly
gaze
but
sweeping the
inexorably,
barren sea.
towards the epicenter
The
of the horror.
gulls, those
Eric
ever-noisy
Redbeard
companions
roared,
of any
his
voyage,
voice finally
had vanished
breaking
from
the
the
spell
sky
of terrified
as it wiped
silence
away.
that had gripped his crew.
The crew on deck,
Oars!
repairing nets
Man
or
the
honing
oars!
blades, grew
Row,
quiet too,
you sons
their
of
chatter
sea
fading
dogs!
as the
Row
eerie
for
hush
your
seeped
lives!
into their souls.
Steer her away!
Then a new sound
But it was like
emerged,
trying
a
to
low,
paddle a canoe
almost
away from a
inaudible
tidal
hum,
wave.
a
The creature
vibration
was
that
still
seemed
rising,
to travel
its true
not
form
through the
yet to be
air but
fully
through the
revealed,
ship's
but
very
already it
timbers,
dwarfed their
up
vessel,
through their
casting a
boots and
shadow
into their
that
chests.
swallowed them whole.
The
One of
water
the
around the
colossal
Polar
tentacles,
Dawn began
glistening
to act
black
oddly.
and green with ancient
It
slime,
wasn't choppy,
swept through
nor
the air
did
with
it rise in
deceptive
the
speed.
usual way of the open
It wasn't
sea.
aimed at the ship.
Instead,
yet.
large,
But it
slick
passed
patches
so close
appeared
that the wind
as
of
if
its
the ocean
passage
itself
tore at
were
their
wounded.
clothes and stung their
The surface
faces
would
with
swell
icy
in one
spray.
spot, then
It crashed
subside,
back into the
only to
sea
rise
with a
again
sound like
elsewhere,
1,000
as if some
cannons
vast
firing at
lung were
once,
breathing
sending
heavily
a wave
beneath them.
surging over their
A
decks,
young sailor,
nearly washing
barely
Finn
grown,
overboard.
named Tor,
The young sailor
pointed a
screamed,
shaking
a
finger
raw,
toward the port
high-pitched
bow.
sound of pure,
"Captain,
unadulterated
look."
terror.
All eyes
Another
followed
tentacle,
his gesture.
then another, began
About
to
half a
move with
league
more
away,
deliberate
the sea
intent,
was different,
their
darker,
tips seeming
a
to
pool
sniff
of
the
inky
air,
blackness
to taste
against
the presence
gray,
of the fragile
swirling
wooden
slowly,
vessel and the
deliberately, like thick stew stirred by an unseen hand. As they stared, gripped by an unnamed dread, the swirling grew fiercer. The water in that spot began to rise, not as a wave, but as a solid, monstrous hump. By Thor's mighty hammer, Eric whispered, his hand instinctively gripping the axe always at his belt. "What sorcery is this?" The mound of water rose higher and higher, forming a small hill on the ocean's surface,
Warm-blooded
and then
life it
something
contained.
began to
The
emerge from
central
its
mass
crest.
of the creature, a mountainous
first,
dome
it
of flesh
resembled
that
jagged,
defied any
dark rocks
earthly
gleaming
comparison,
wetly in the
was now
faint light,
fully visible,
perhaps
a
the
living
perilous tips
island
of a
of
hidden
nightmare.
shoal.
And from somewhere
no
within
shoal
that
moved with
colossal
such
bulk,
intent.
though they could not
No
pinpoint
shoal
its
throbbed
source,
with such
they felt
undeniable,
more than heard a
terrifying
sound,
vitality.
a deep,
These were
resonant
not rocks.
groaning, like the shifting
Slowly,
of tectonic
painfully,
plates,
the truth
or the sigh
dawned
of
on
a
the
god
horrified
stirring
crew
from
of
an
the polar
aeon-long
dawn.
slumber.
The rocks
One
were
of
the
the questing arms,
barnacle-crusted,
its tip
seaweed-laden
quivering with
protrusions
anticipation,
of a living
now
entity,
hovered directly above
a being
the
of
northern
such
star's
unimaginable
foredeck.
size that
It
their
paused there
minds
for a
struggled to
heart-stopping
grasp
moment,
it.
a pillar
The
of
sea
shadow
around this
blotting
rising
out the
titan
sky.
began to
The
churn
men
and
below
boil,
stared upwards,
not
their
with
faces
heat,
pale,
but with the
their
sheer
mouths agape,
displacement of its
every
massive
hope
bulk.
of escape draining away
And
like
then,
sand
the
through their
arms.
fingers.
O
Eric
gods,
Redbeard
the
knew,
arms.
with a certainty that
Like the
chilled him to
twisting
the marrow
limbs
of
of a
his
nightmare
bones,
grove,
that their
they
sagas were
unfurled
about
from
to
the
end,
roiling water.
not in a blaze of glorious
Each was
battle
thicker than the
against
polar
human
dawn's
foes,
mainmast,
but here,
a column of
in the
slick,
cold,
dark muscle,
indifferent embrace
tapering
of
to a
something
probing,
that should not
sentient
be,
tip.
something that had
They
crawled
rose
out
higher
of the
and higher,
deepest,
a
most
dozen or
terrifying
more,
recesses of
stretching
their
toward the
ancestors'
heavens like
darkest
worshippers
dreams.
of some
The
ancient,
tentacle began
forgotten
its descent,
deity. Before
slow at
arching and
first,
curving,
then
their
gathering a
undersides
terrifying,
revealing rows of
unstoppable
suckers,
momentum
each the
aimed
size of a
directly at the
warrior's
heart
shield,
of their ship,
each
at
capable
the very
of
spot
gripping
where
with a
he and his
force that could
bravest men
shatter
stood
stone.
frozen, watching
The air
doom
grew
itself
thick with that
uncoil.
strange, foul odor, a stench of
Scylla
the
and
deepest ocean
Charybdis,
trenches,
the
of
devil and
ancient
the
rot
deep
and
blue
raw,
sea.
primal power.
Let us set our course for
The
the
humming
sun-drenched,
vibration intensified,
wine-dark waters
rattling their
of the
very
ancient
teeth.
Mediterranean,
The
a
polar
sea that
dawn,
cradled
caught in the
heroes and
unnatural
gods, but
currents
also
of the
birthed
rising
monsters
behemoth,
of unimaginable
began to drift
terror.
slowly but
Here,
inevitably
nestled
toward the
between the
heart
rugged
of the
coast
horror.
of what would one day
Eric
be Italy
Flamebeard
and the
bellowed,
fertile
his voice
shores of
shattering the
Sicily,
spell of
lay a narrow,
petrified
churning
silence that had
passage of
seized his
water,
crew.
the Strait of
Oars, man them. Row, you sons of the sea. Row for your lives. Steer her clear. But it was like trying to paddle a skiff against a maelstrom. The creature was still rising, its true form only beginning to reveal itself. Form yet to be fully revealed, but already it dwarfed their vessel, casting a shadow that swallowed them whole. One of the colossal tentacles, glistening black and green with ancient slime, swept through the air with deceptive speed. It wasn't aimed at the ship, not yet, but it passed so close that the wind of its passage tore at their clothes and stung their faces with icy spray. It crashed back into the sea with a sound
as
like a
mortals would
thousand
come to
cannons
call it.
firing at
But
once,
to the mariners of
sending a
old,
wave
it was known
surging
by the
over their
dread it
decks,
inspired.
nearly
For this
washing
was
Finn
no mere
overboard.
channel. It was a
The
deadly
young
gauntlet,
sailor screamed,
a watery
a
Scylla
high-pitched
trap,
sound of
from
pure,
which few returned
unadulterated
unscathed,
terror.
lorded over
Another
by two
tentacle,
unspeakable
then another,
abominations.
began to move
Imagine
with more
a ship,
deliberate intent,
perhaps a sleek,
their tips seeming
black-hulled
to sniff the
pentaconter,
air,
its
to
50
taste the
oars
presence
rising
of the
and
fragile
falling
wooden
in
vessel
perfect,
and the
desperate
warm-blooded
rhythm,
life it
its
contained.
bronze-tipped rame
The
cleaving
central
the
mass of
turquoise
the creature,
waves.
a
The
mountainous
captain,
dome of
a man
flesh
named
that
Lycaon,
defied any
with
earthly
eyes as grey
comparison,
and
was
stormy
now
as the
fully
winter
visible,
sea, has
a living
guided his
island of
vessel through
nightmare.
tempests and
And
skirmishes,
from somewhere
his courage
within
a
that
beacon to
colossal
his
bulk,
men.
Though they could not
They are returning
pinpoint
from
its
a long
source,
voyage,
they felt
their
more than
hearts
heard a
filled
sound,
with the hope of
a
home,
deep resonant
their hold
groaning,
perhaps
like the
laden with
shifting of
treasures from
tectonic
distant
plates or the sigh
exotic
of a god
lands.
stirring
But
from an
first,
eon-long
they
slumber.
must brave the passage.
One of the
As
questing
they approach,
arms,
the very
its
air
tip
seems to grow
quivering with
heavy,
anticipation,
charged with an
now hovered
unseen
directly
menace.
above the
cheerful
northern
chatter of
star's
the crew
foredeck.
dies down, replaced
It
by a
paused there
tense,
for a
watchful
heart-stopping
silence,
moment, a
broken
pillar of
only
shadow
by the
blotting
rhythmic
out the
splash of the
sky.
oars and the
The men
strained
below
creak of the
stared
oar
upwards,
leathers.
their
The
faces
sea
pale.
itself changes hue
System,
from a
their
welcoming
mouths
blue to a more
agape,
ominous,
every hope of
bruised
escape
purple,
draining away
and the
like
currents
sand
begin
through
to
their
tug
fingers.
at the ship with a malevolent,
Eric Redbeard
unseen
knew
force.
with a certainty
To
that
one
chilled
side,
him
a
to the marrow
towering
of his
cliff
bones
looms,
that their
a sheer
sagas were
wall
about
of
to
dark,
end.
forbidding rock that
Not in a
seems to
blaze
claw
of
at the
glorious
sky.
battle
Its
against
face
human
is pocked
foes,
with shadowed
but here in the
crevices and
cold,
echoing caves,
indifferent
and from the
embrace of
highest,
something that
most
should not be,
inaccessible of these,
something that
a
had
constant
crawled out of the
chilling
deepest,
mist seems
most
to seep,
terrifying
like the
recesses
cold
of their
breath of something
ancestors' darkest
ancient and
dreams.
evil. This is
The
the lair
tentacle
of Scylla.
began its descent,
Legend
slow
whispers
at
that
first,
Scylla was
then
not
gathering
always
a terrifying,
Once,
unstoppable momentum,
in the mists of time,
aimed directly
she was a
at the
sea
heart
nymph
of their
of
ship,
ethereal
at the
beauty,
very
her
spot
laughter
where
like
he
the
and
chime
his
of
bravest
distant
men
bells,
stood
her
frozen,
form as
watching
graceful as
doom
the
itself
swaying
uncoil.
seaweed. But beauty,
Scylla and
in the world
Charybdis,
of gods
the
and
devil in the
monsters,
deep blue
often
sea.
attracts unwanted
Let
attention.
us set our course
or
for the
worse,
sun-drenched, wine-dark waters of the ancient Mediterranean, a sea that cradled heroes and gods, but also birthed monsters of unimaginable terror. Here, nestled between the rugged coast of what would one day be Italy and the fertile shores of Sicily, lay a narrow, churning passage of water, the Strait of Messina, as mortals would come to call it. But to the mariners of old, it was known by the dread it inspired. For this was no mere channel. It was a deadly gauntlet, a watery sally port from which
the
few
bitter
returned
jealousy
unscathed,
of powerful
lorded
rivals,
over by two
whether it was the wrath of
unspeakable
a spurned god,
abominations.
the dark magic
Imagine
of a
a
vengeful
ship,
sorceress
perhaps
like
a
Circe,
sleek,
or
black-hulled
some other
pentaconter,
forgotten
its 50
tragedy.
oars
The
rising
lovely
and
nymph
falling
was
in perfect,
transformed,
desperate
twisted
rhythm,
into a
its
creature of
bronze-tipped
nightmare.
ram cleaving the
From her
turquoise
waist, where
waves.
once the gentle curve of
The
her hips
captain,
had
a
swayed,
man named
there now
Lyco,
erupted
with
a
eyes as
horrifying
grey and
cluster of
stormy
six
as the winter
impossibly
sea,
long
has
and
guided his
sinuous
vessel
necks,
through
like
tempests and
monstrous
skirmishes.
slithering eels.
His
Each
courage,
neck was
a
topped
beacon
with a
to his
grotesque
men.
canine head,
They are
its
returning
jaws
from a
bristling
long
with a
voyage,
triple row
their
of
hearts
needle-sharp
filled with the
teeth,
hope of home,
capable of
their
tearing
hold
flesh
perhaps
and
laden
crushing
with
bone with
treasures
sickening
from distant,
ease.
exotic
These
lands.
heads, with their wild,
But first,
bloodshot
they must
eyes and
brave the
slavering
passage.
muzzles, would dart out
As they
from the
approach,
darkness of
the
her
very
cave
air seems
with
to grow
lightning
heavy,
speed.
charged with an
Their
unseen
barks
menace.
a cacophony of yelping,
The cheerful
baying
chatter of the
horror
crew
that
dies
echoed
down,
across the strait,
replaced by
a
a
sound
tense,
designed to
watchful
freeze the
silence,
blood and
broken
shatter
only
the
by the
courage of
rhythmic
any who
splash
heard
of the
it.
oars
Her
and the
lower
strained
body, it
creak
was said,
of the oar
remained
leathers.
fused to the rock.
The
A
sea
monstrous
itself changes hue from a
barnacle-encrusted
welcoming
anchor,
blue to
forever
a more
binding her
ominous,
to her
bruised
predatory
purple,
perch,
and the
her
currents
hunger
begin to
insatiable,
tug at the
her
ship with a
malice
malevolent,
eternal.
unseen
She
force.
was the swift,
To
unseen
one
death from
side,
above,
a towering
the
cliff
selective
looms,
horror
a sheer
that
wall
plucked
of
men
dark,
from their decks
forbidding
like
rock
figs
that
from a
seems to
branch.
claw at the sky.
Lycaon,
Its
his
face
knuckles
is
white
pocked
as he
with
grips
shadowed
the steering oar,
crevices and echoing
knows of
caves.
Scylla. Every
And from the
sailor who
highest,
plied these
most
waters
inaccessible
knew.
of these,
He
a
orders his
constant,
men to give
chilling
the
mist
cliff a
seems
wide
to seep,
berth,
like
to
the
row
cold
with
breath
all
of
their
something
might
ancient
towards the
and
opposite
evil.
side of the strait.
This is the
But
lair
in
of
fleeing
Scylla.
one monster, they
Legend
inevitably
whispers
draw
that Scylla
closer
was
to the
not
other.
always thus.
For on the other side,
Once,
directly
in the
opposite
mists of
Scylla's
time,
cliff,
she was
where
a
the
sea
water
nymph of
churns in a
ethereal
constant,
beauty, her
ominous
laughter
swirl.
like the chime of distant bells, her form as graceful as the swaying seaweed. But beauty in the world of gods and monsters often attracts unwanted attention, or worse, the bitter jealousy of powerful rivals. Whether it was the wrath of a spurned god, the dark magic of a vengeful sorceress like Circe, or some other forgotten tragedy, the lovely nymph was transformed, twisted into a creature of nightmare. From her waist, where once the gentle curve of her hips had swayed, there now erupted a horrifying cluster of 6 impossibly long and sinuous necks, like monstrous, slithering eels. Each neck was topped with a grotesque, canine head, its jaws bristling with a triple row of needle-sharp teeth capable of tearing flesh and crushing bone with sickening ease.
lurks
These heads,
Charybdis.
with their wild,
She is no creature of
bloodshot
defined
eyes and
form like
slathering
Scylla,
muzzles,
no
would
beast of
dart out
flesh
from
and
the
fang.
darkness of her cave
Charybdis
with
is something
lightning
more
speed.
elemental, more
Their
primal,
barks,
a
a
raw,
cacophony of yelping,
untamed force
baying
of the
horror
ocean's
echoed
fury.
across the
Imagine
strait,
a colossal,
sound designed to
submerged
freeze the
bladder,
blood and
or the
shatter the
gaping
courage
maw
of
of some
any who heard it.
unseen abyssal entity,
Her lower
a
body,
monstrous,
it was
living
said,
whirlpool,
remained fused to the
3
rock,
times a day, with a
monstrous,
sound like the world itself
barnacle-encrusted
groaning in
anchor,
agony.
forever binding
Charybdis
her
would
to her
begin to suck
predatory
down
perch.
the waters of the strait.
Her hunger
The sea would
insatiable,
begin to
her
spin,
malice
faster
eternal.
and faster,
She
forming
was
a
the
vast,
swift,
inescapable
unseen death from
vortex,
above,
its
the
sides
selective
steep
horror
and
that
treacherous,
plucked men
its
from
center
their
a
decks
dark,
like figs
gurgling
from a
pit
branch.
that led to the lightless,
Lyco,
crushing
his
depths.
knuckles white as he grips the
Anything
steering
caught in this
oar,
monstrous
knows of Scylla.
indraft. Ships,
Every sailor
men,
who plied
whales,
these waters
the
knew.
very debris of the ocean
He orders his
would be
men to
drawn
give the
down,
cliff a wide
down,
berth, to
into
row
the
with all their
churning
might
abyss,
towards the
crushed
opposite
and
side of the
consumed.
strait.
And then, just
But
as
in fleeing one
terrifyingly,
monster,
3 times
they
a day,
inevitably draw
Charybdis
closer
would
to the
vomit
other.
forth the waters she
For
had
on the
swallowed.
other side,
With a
directly
deafening roar, a
opposite
colossal
Scylla's cliff,
geyser of
where the
boiling,
water churns in
briny
a constant,
water
ominous
mixed with the
swirl,
splintered
lurks
remains of
Charybdis.
ships, the shattered
She is no
bones of
creature of
sailors,
defined
and the
form
foul
like Scylla,
detritus
no
of the
beast
deep
of flesh and
would
fawn.
erupt skywards before
Charybdis is
crashing
something
back
more
down
elemental,
to roil
more
the strait
primal,
into a
raw,
chaotic,
untamed
seething
force
cauldron.
of the ocean's fury.
There was no malice in Charybdis,
Imagine a
no
colossal,
cunning, only the
submerged
relentless
bladder or the
rhythmic
gaping
hunger
maw of
and regurgitation of the
unseen
deep,
abyssal
an
entity,
indiscriminate
a
doom
monstrous,
that promised
living
utter
whirlpool.
annihilation.
3
So,
times a day,
Lycaon
with
and
a
his
sound
crew
like the
find
world itself
themselves in
groaning
this
in
sailor's
agony,
nightmare.
Charybdis
To
would
steer
begin
too
to
close
suck
to
down the
Scylla's
waters
cliff
of the
is to
strait.
invite those 6
The sea
ravenous
would begin
heads
to
to
spin
snatch his
faster
men,
and
their
faster,
screams
forming a
echoing
vast,
against the stone as they
inescapable vortex, its sides steep and treacherous, its center a dark, gurgling pit that led to the lightless, crushing depths. Anything caught in this monstrous indraft, ships, men, whales, the very debris of the ocean, would be drawn down into the churning abyss, crushed and consumed. And then, just as terrifyingly, 3 times a day, Charybdis would vomit forth the waters she had swallowed. With a deafening roar, a colossal geyser of boiling, briny water mixed with the splintered remains of ships, the shattered bones of sailors, and the foul detritus of the deep, would erupt skywards before crashing back down to roil the strait into a chaotic, seething cauldron. There was no malice in Charybdis, no cunning, only the relentless, rhythmic hunger and regurgitation of the deep, an indiscriminate doom that promised utter annihilation. So Lyco and his crew find themselves in this sailor's nightmare. To steer too close to Scylla's cliff is
still
to invite
living
those
into
6
the
ravenous
monster's
heads to
fetid
snatch
lair.
his men,
Yet to
their
veer too
screams
far from
echoing
that
against
dreadful
the stone
precipice
as they are
is to
dragged,
risk being
still
caught
living,
in the
into
inexorable
the
pull of
monster's fetid
Charybdis.
lair.
To see his
Yet
beloved
to veer too
Pylos
far
and
from
all
that
her
dreadful
crew swallowed
precipice is to
whole by the
risk being
gaping,
caught in the inexorable
swirling
pull
maw
of
the sea.
Charybdis, to see
The
his
oarsmen
beloved
strain, their
Pentaconter and
muscles
all
burning,
her crew swallowed
sweat
whole
stinging
by
their
the
eyes,
gaping,
their breath
swirling
coming
maw
in
of the
ragged
sea.
gasps.
The
The air
oarsmen
is thick
strain,
with the
their
chilling mist
muscles
from
burning,
Scylla's cave on
sweat
one
stinging
side,
their
and the
eyes,
thunderous
their breath coming
gurgling
in
roar of
ragged
Charybdis
gasps.
growing louder
The
on the
air
other.
is thick with the chilling mist
Lycaon
from
can see
Scylla's
the
cave
dark,
on one side
swirling
and the
patterns
thunderous.
in the water
Gerd
ahead, the
Jormungandr
telltale
expanded
signs
at an
that Charybdis
impossible
is
rate.
beginning her terrible
Its
inhalation.
coils unraveled,
He barks
stretching
orders,
for leagues,
trying to
then
steer a
hundreds of
desperate
leagues,
middle
then
course, a
thousands.
path so narrow it
It
seems
became a living,
impossible.
breathing mountain
Suddenly,
range
from
beneath
the
the
cliff
waves,
to their starboard,
its movements
a chorus of
causing
horrifying
earthquakes and
yelps
tsunamis
erupts,
on the distant
closer than
shores
they had
of
dared to
Midgard.
imagine. 6
So vast
shadowy,
did Jormungandr
snake-like
become
necks
that
lash out from the
eventually its
gloom of the
colossal,
cave with blinding
serpentine
speed.
body encircled
Lycaon
the
watches,
entirety
his
of
heart a
Midgard.
stone in his chest as 6
lay
of his
in the
best
abyssal
men,
depths,
men who
a
had shared his
self-contained
bread
ocean
and his
within the
battles,
ocean,
are
its immense
plucked from
head
the
coming
deck,
to rest
their
before
cries
its
of
own
terror cut
thrashing
brutally
tail.
short. He
And
sees
there,
the flash
in
of
the
white
eternal
teeth,
darkness,
the dark
it bit
spray
down
of
upon
blood
that
against the
tail,
grey rock
forming an
before they are
unbroken,
dragged,
living ring
thrashing
around the
into the
world of
darkness.
humankind. The
remaining
Midgard
crew
serpent,
scream,
the world
some
serpent,
dropping their oars in
Jormungandr.
panic. But there is
Its
no
breath
time
became
for
the
grief,
tides,
no
its
time
shifting
for fear
coils
to
the
take
ocean
root.
currents.
The ship,
The
momentarily
world
out
of
of
mortals
control as
was
the rowers
quite
falter,
literally held within
lurches
its venomous
violently.
embrace.
The terrifying, sucking
For
roar
long
of
ages,
Charybdis is now
Jormungandr lay
deafening,
thus, a
directly ahead
slumbering,
of them. The
world-encircling
Pylos is
dread,
caught in the outer
largely
edges of the
unseen
forming
by
whirlpool,
mortals.
spinning,
Those
being drawn
sailors would
inexorably
whisper
towards the
tales of
dark.
impossible waves that rose from calm seas, of glimpses of scales so vast they mistook them for chains of islands, of a chilling, venomous aura that would sometimes permeate the air far from land. But the gods of Asgard had not forgotten Loki's monstrous child, and one god in particular held a special enmity for the world serpent. This was Thor, the mighty thunderer, Odin's son, wielder of the enchanted hammer Mjolnir, a god of immense strength, boundless courage, and a somewhat fiery temper. Thor and Jormungandr were destined to be mortal enemies, their fates intertwined, their final, cataclysmic confrontation foretold to be a cornerstone of Ragnarok. One famous tale tells of Thor's desire to test his strength against the serpent. Disguised as a young man, he went on a fishing trip with the giant Hymir. Hymir, reluctant to take this boisterous youth too far out to sea, was nonetheless goaded by Thor's taunts. Thor, with his divine strength, rowed them far beyond Hymir's usual fishing grounds, out into the deepest, darkest part of the ocean where the giant feared to tread. For bait, Thor used the head of Hymir's largest ox, a gruesome and potent lure. He fashioned a fishing line of
Churning
incredible
vortex that
strength
promises
and
a
hook
watery
that was
grave
more
for
like
them
an
all.
anchor.
Lycaon fights the
cast this
steering oar,
monstrous
his
bait
muscles
into the
screaming,
abyssal depths.
his eyes fixed on the
The
monstrous
silence
gaping
stretched,
hole in the
broken
sea
only by
that is
the
growing
creak of
larger with
Hymir's
every
small boat
passing
and the
second,
giant's nervous
threatening to
muttering.
swallow them to an oblivion
Thor waited,
from which there
his
is no
knuckles white
return.
on the line,
The
a
bow of
grim
the pilot
smile
dips
playing on his
precariously,
lips.
the black swirling
Then the
water
line went
already
taut,
licking
not
at
with
the
the tug of
foredeck.
an ordinary
The cries
fish,
of his
but with a
remaining
pull
men,
so
a
immense,
desperate
so
chorus
powerful,
against the
that
thunder
the
of
boat
the
itself
abyss.
groaned and threatened to splinter. Thor braced himself,
Jormungandr,
his divine
the
muscles
world
bulging,
serpent.
his feet
Let
planted
us cast our
firmly on the
gaze back to the
thwarts.
dawn of ages,
He
in the
began
realm
to
of
pull
Asgard,
hand over hand,
the shining
his strength
citadel
pitted
of the
against
Aesir
something
gods,
of
a
unimaginable
place of
weight
golden
and
halls
fury.
and befrost's shimmering
The sea
arch.
around them began
Yet
to
even
turn
here,
to boil,
amidst
as if a
divine
submerged
splendor,
volcano
shadows
were
could
erupting.
fall, and prophecies of
Hymir,
doom were
his face
whispered on the
pale with
winds that
terror,
swept
began
down
to
from
scream,
the peaks of
recognizing the
Yggdrasil,
signs,
the world
knowing
tree.
what manner of
For in the
creature
shadowy
Thor had
land
hooked.
of Jotunheimr,
Slowly,
the realm of
agonizingly,
giants, the
Thor
trickster
drew his
god
catch
Loki,
upwards.
ever a source of
The
mischief and
strain was
often malice,
incredible.
had fathered
The
three
boat was
monstrous
being
children,
pulled down,
with the
waves
giantess
crashing over the
Angerboda,
gunwales, but
she
the
who
thunder
brings
god would
sorrow.
not yield.
These were no
And
ordinary
then,
offspring.
from the roiling,
First
dark
was
water,
the colossal
a head
wolf
began to
Fenrir,
emerge,
whose hunger
a
was
head so
insatiable
vast it
and
blotted
whose
out the
strength grew
horizon.
with every passing day.
Its scales shimmered
Second
with an
was
oily,
Hel,
venomous
a being
light.
half beautiful woman,
Its eyes,
half
like
decaying
burning
corpse,
coals, were
destined
filled
to
with an
rule over
ancient,
the dishonorable
reptilian
dead
fury.
in the icy realm of
Jormungandr,
Niflheim,
the world serpent,
and the
had
third,
taken the
born
bait.
from that unholy
Its
union,
immense,
was
fanged
a
maw
serpent.
gaped, the ox
But
head
this was
still
no common
impaled on
snake,
Thor's
no
mighty
mere
hook.
viper of the fields.
Venom,
From the
black
moment
and
of its
steaming,
hatching,
dripped
it
from
was
its
clear.
fangs, sizzling as it hit the water, creating clouds of acrid smoke. The serpent thrashed, its movements sending mountainous waves crashing around the tiny boat, threatening to swamp it. Hymir, gibbering with fear, fumbled for his knife, intending to cut the line. But Thor roared in triumph and fury, his eyes blazing with a warrior's joy. He held the line fast, and as Jormungandr's monstrous head rose higher, its dripping jaws almost level with the boat, Thor reached for Mjolnir, his hammer, which flew to his hand. He raised it high, ready to deliver a killing blow to shatter that colossal, venomous skull. The air crackled with anticipation. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath as the god of thunder prepared to strike the world serpent in a battle that could crack the foundations of Midgard. The hammer began its descent, aimed directly between those baleful, burning eyes, promising a cataclysmic impact that would echo through all the 9 worlds. Mermaids and sirens,
Here this creature
a
was an
symphony
abomination
sea-bound
of
souls
terrifying
and fatal
potential.
shores.
Its scales were the
Let us
color of a
drift back
stormy
to an
sea,
age
a
when the
shifting
world felt
pattern of
boundless,
deep
and the
blues,
vast,
greens, and
untamed
bruised
oceans
purples,
held as many
each one
secrets
as large
they
as a
did
warrior's
stars in their
shield,
inky depths.
and harder than dragon scale.
Upon these waters,
its eyes,
brave
even in
mariners
infancy,
sailed,
held a
their
cold,
wooden
ancient
vessels mere
light,
specks against the
unblinking,
immensity,
and filled with a
their
primal
hearts
venom
often heavy
that
with the
promised a
loneliness
slow,
of long
agonizing
voyages.
death.
their
It
minds
grew at an
susceptible
alarming
to the
rate, its
enchantments
coils
that the
thickening,
sea,
its
in
length
capricious
extending,
moods,
until it
might
became
conjure.
a source of profound
From
unease
countless
even to its
cultures across
monstrous kin.
sun-drenched
Word of these
archipelagos and
terrifying
along
progeny
mist-shrouded
reached Odin,
coastlines,
the
tales have
Allfather,
emerged,
wise and
whispered in
far-seeing,
hushed
who
tones
sat
around
upon
flickering
his high
tavern
throne,
fires or sung in mournful
from which he
shanties
could
on the
survey
creaking
all
decks
the
of
nine
ships far
worlds.
from home.
The prophecies, the
Tales of
ancient
beings half
runes,
human,
spoke
half
of these
aquatic,
children of
whose
Loki,
beauty was
playing a
as profound
devastating
as the
role in
ocean
Ragnarok,
itself,
the
and whose
twilight of the
voices could
gods,
weave
the
spells of
cataclysmic end of
irresistible
all
allure.
things. Fearful of
These
their
were the
burgeoning
mermaids,
power
the
and the
sirens,
doom they
names
heralded,
often
Odin
used
decreed that these
interchangeably,
monstrous
yet
siblings
sometimes
must be
hinting
dealt
at
with.
subtle, dangerous
Tyr,
distinctions.
the bravest of the gods, managed
Imagine
to bind
a ship,
Fenrir,
let's call her
though
the
it cost him
seafoam
his hand.
dancer,
Hell
captained
was
by a
cast
young,
down into the
adventurous
depths of
soul named
Niflheim
Alexios.
to rule over the dead.
His
And for
vessel is
Jormungandr,
returning from a
Odin
perilous
reserved a
journey,
unique
laden
fate.
with exotic
He seized the
spices
young
and
serpent,
silks from the Far
already
East.
grown to a horrifying
The crew,
size,
weary
its
from months
thrashing
at sea,
coils
dream
capable
of
of
familiar
crushing stone,
shores, of
its
warm
fangs
embraces,
dripping with a
and the
venom
taste of
so
home-cooked
potent
food.
it sizzled upon the ground.
The sun is
With a
beginning to
mighty
dip
heave,
below the
born
horizon,
of divine
painting the
strength
western
and grim
sky
necessity,
in hues of
the
fiery orange, soft rose, and deepening violet. A gentle breeze fills the sails, carrying with it the scent of salt and something else, something indefinably sweet and intoxicating. The sea is calm, like polished glass, reflecting the vibrant sunset. It is that magical hour between day and night when the veil between worlds is said to be at its thinnest. A lookout, perched high in the crow's nest, a lad named Theon with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, suddenly cries out, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Captain! Land ho!" Or, something wondrous. All eyes turn. Nestled in a secluded cove, where jagged, dark rocks jutted from the turquoise water like the teeth of some ancient sea beast, they saw them. At first, it was just a flash of movement, a glint of something bright upon the shadowed stones. Then, as the seafoam dancer drifted closer, drawn by an unseen current, or perhaps by a more subtle, insidious pull, the figures became clearer. They were women, or so they appeared, from the waist up, of such unearthly beauty that the hearts of the hardened sailors seemed to stop in their chests. Their hair, the color of spun moonlight, midnight seaweed, or fiery coral, cascaded around their bare shoulders, glistening with sea spray. Their skin seemed to shimmer with an inner luminescence, as if they were sculpted from pearl and moonbeams. Their eyes, large and luminous, held an expression of gentle invitation, of profound, ancient wisdom, and a hint of playful mischief. And from their lips, oh, from their lips, came a sound that transcended mere music. It was a song, a melody so pure, so achingly beautiful, that it seemed to pluck at the very strings of each man's soul. It spoke of forgotten joys, of deepest longings, of a peace and pleasure beyond mortal comprehension. It was a sound that promised an end to all weariness, a balm for every sorrow, an embrace of eternal bliss. The notes wove through the air like silken threads, wrapping around the sailors, drawing them in. Their faces,
The ocean's depths, a realm of breathtaking beauty and terrifying mystery.